I'm joined now by Tom Foley, the former Republican candidate for governor, current columnist Rick Green, and Pat Scully of the Hanging Shed. Thanks, everyone, for being here. Thank you very much, Tom, for taking the time.
My pleasure.
So what are you doing these days?
Well, actually, win or lose after a campaign, you have to close up campaign offices and things like that. So there's still some work to do, but mostly I'm spending time with Leslie, and we're catching up on our rest.
Absolutely. So what was I thought you handled yourself gracefully during the whole controversy of the election, but what was that like for you? It was tumultuous, I guess?
Well, first of all, there's a lot of time pressure, obviously, because people want to know the results, but we wanted to have the facts, and gathering the facts were not that easy. So there was a lot of pressure on us to gather the facts and do everything quickly, but I think we did a good job. Unfortunately, it fell on a weekend when people probably weren't all that focused on how much time it was taking.
Absolutely.
Mr. Ambassador, the people that wrote into my blog, even those that weren't really paying close attention but knew there was some sort of contentious ending to this whole thing, commented that they had a newfound admiration for you and the way you handled yourself in the entire ending of all of this. And as a reporter, we just can't help but look ahead. 2012, there's a Senate seat open. You were originally a candidate for the Senate seat, won by Dick Blumenthal. Is that something you'd consider?
Well, I'm taking a rest. That's probably like talking to a woman who's just had a child and say, hey, you want to get pregnant again? Listen, the campaign's a tremendous amount of work. It's very demanding, and I was very focused on this race. I am grateful that people seem to respond well to how the aftermath of the election was handled. But no, I'm just sort of collecting and closing up what's happened in this campaign and going to get some rest.
Tom, you spent a weekend there looking very closely at the election, how it was handled. What do you think we should be focusing on now? Because I think some of us are looking back on this and still wondering, how did Connecticut screw this up? Yeah. What would you focus on, do you think?
Well, actually, I think there is going to be a group that's going to look into what happened in Bridgeport and some other communities, and we definitely should do that. I'm not sure what it will say we should do, but clearly I think some better pre-planning, maybe some assistance from the state to communities to help them understand what turnout's likely to be. We never should have problems with running out of ballots. That's a very simple problem. But some of the other things that we're seeing at the polling stations and things like that, none of those doubts should ever be there after an election in Connecticut.
And how about people keeping their mouth shut until we have the final results? Any thoughts on that? We had some kind of prominent statements made about the election. Should we kind of zip it there until we have the numbers?
Yeah, I think the Secretary of the State really shouldn't be calling races until there's some certainty. And I think, unfortunately, the language that Susan Bajzowicz was using, I think left a misimpression that the results were, number one, final, that they're official or unofficial. And even if she's saying unofficial, she is an official. So an official saying something that's unofficial really is sort of official.
It's official. Yeah,
that's right.
It's a strange dynamic in the days afterward. I don't know if you're, like you said, you're decompressing. You may not have had a chance to. But the local talk radio in Connecticut turned on you. And in one case said that you gave up and you quit because you looked at the numbers and said, this is what it is. How do you feel about that?
Well, it's unfortunate, but there are a lot of people who I think want you to fight, and I think there are a lot of people who, under the circumstances, it would be very hard to convince that not enough had gone wrong to change the outcome of the election. But as I said on Monday, I was fully convinced and very confident that nothing that happened on Election Day would have changed the outcome of this election. And so there's no real point in fighting, and the state is not served well by postponing a decision when we know what the outcome was.
When do you start? I know you said you're kind of decompressing now and you're wrapping things up with the people who worked on your campaign, et cetera. And so when do you decide what your next step will be?
Well, I would like to stay involved at least in making sure that there is a voice for good policy and good government in Connecticut, where we have no Republicans serving in statewide offices. We have no Republicans serving in federal offices. And we have both the House and the Senate dominated by Democrats. I want to make sure that there's a voice for good policy. So I haven't figured out how I'm going to do that, but I would like to do that.
Are there a couple of, in the unlikely possibility that Dan Malloy would call you up and say, give me some advice here, Foley, are there a couple of tough decisions that you would say he needs to grapple with, the ones that aren't going to win you any friends out there? Would you list 2 or 3 that you think that the next governor needs to face right off?
I'll tell you the advice I would offer him. I haven't been asked, but you've asked me what was he, so you give me an opportunity as a hypothetical. First of all, he won fewer than half of the votes in the state, and he only won 41 towns. I'm not sure the exact percentage, but it's like 25% of the towns or less. And so I would recommend to him that his first policy decisions and gestures are ones that will convince people that he's representing the consensus view in Connecticut and the voters, and not move in the direction of throwing red meat or payoffs to the people who voted for him. I think that would be a big mistake. So I would watch carefully. For example, if the first initiatives are mandatory paid sick leave or abolishing the death penalty or something that's clearly taking care and pleasing the people who voted for him. That would be a big mistake, a leadership mistake, I think. I think he needs to win the confidence and trust of the people who did not vote for him. So I think he needs to move in the direction of the center and, in my opinion, the direction of good policy and what's good for Connecticut long term.
With the numbers you just gave us as far as the towns and percentage of vote, are you saying, as other folks have, that he lacks a mandate?
Well, he has a plurality of the vote. I don't think there's a mandate or even a consensus in Connecticut for higher taxes. I do think there's a strong consensus for limiting the size and cost of our state government. How we do that, I think, there's not a strong consensus for one way or the other because the average voter doesn't have enough information. So that'll be for the governor to determine. But I think if there's if there's an early gesture or move to increase taxes, I think that would be a big mistake. There's no mandate for that. There's no mandate for abolishing the death penalty either.
Well, and we saw already that Senator McKinney and Representative Cafaro have already said they're going to resist taxes. So though you wanted the job, I mean, surely you must know that it's going to be brutal. It's
not going to be an easy job. That's true. Yep.
Would you, as you look back on it, maybe if you could convince 2,500 people to vote for you instead of Dan Malloy, what do you think you could have done? Anything? Have you thought about that late at night?
Well, this is a very difficult state. We're a blue state. We have only fewer than 21% of our registered voters are Republicans. So as a Republican, you have to have a appeal to unaffiliated voters. And I think one of the things we're going to find when we dig through all the data is that unaffiliated voters turned out in much lower numbers than were anticipated, and that's really what determined the race. And so I think that's what it will come down to. We don't, as a member of a party, you don't have the network set up to turn out unaffiliated voters. It depends on whether or not the issues appeal to them, and for whatever reason they don't have seemed as energized as they were. But I am proud to say for the ones we did capture based on exit polls, we had them 58-37. So almost 3 for 2 coming our way. And so I think on the messages, we were winning, but on party affiliation and turnout, we weren't able to deliver. Looking back, and I've obviously done it, when you have this close a race, you go, gosh, what was the one thing you could have done differently? We had a very good decision-making process set up, and I had a really good team. I'm really proud of the team. I can't think of one thing. One decision we made that if we had made it differently, it would have changed the outcome.
Mr. Messer, as far as not having a mandate for raising taxes or abolishing the death penalty, if in fact Governor Malloy made a move to say make the income tax more progressive, higher at the higher income level, will you be the go-to person for any of us to call and say, are you going to be the voice of the Republican Party? Senator McKinney, Representative Cafaro have been there for a very long time, and they got nowhere near the support that you got in this election. Are you the man for the Republicans?
Well, I don't know about the voice for the Republican Party. I'd like to be the voice for reason and the voice for good policy and good government in the long-term interest of the state. If I were able to establish myself in that role and serve that way, that would make me very happy.
You anticipate that we will see increased taxes?
I anticipate, yes, based on what the governor-elect has said already. I do. I think it's a mistake, and the reason I think it's a mistake is I think it's a short-term strategy. I think that when politicians make short-term strategy that have work short-term but cost us more long-term, that's the type of leadership that we don't need. I think we need leadership where our leaders are persuading people of the short-term sacrifices they have to make for the long term. And nobody chooses to live in a state based on, for example, small fees or even sales taxes. But people do choose where to live based on the income tax. And to raise the income tax in Connecticut right now, you're going to drive higher income people out of this state and discourage higher income people from moving here, which is what has resulted in our having the tax base we do. And if you long-term erode our tax base, you aren't serving anybody well.
And it certainly is a new dynamic. It's going to be a Democratic governor with a Democratic-controlled legislature. In Massachusetts, for instance, the bluest of blue states, we had a whole string of Republican governors, I think ostensibly because they didn't want to turn the whole ball game over to one party or the other. Does that concern you? Do you see problems with that dynamic?
Well, as I said, we don't have any Republicans in any of our statewide offices. I'm worried about it because I think there is no balance or check and balance there, and I have a feeling that the policy will not reflect a balanced policy in what's in the long-term interest of the state.
All right. Thank you very much, Tom Foley. It was a good race. Congratulate you on that, and we wish you good luck.
All right.
Thanks also to Rick Green and Pat Scully. Don't forget, if you missed something here on The Real Story, you can now watch it online by going to ctnow.com. You can also catch us on YouTube. Thanks so much for watching this week's edition of The Real Story. We'll see you here again next week.